As a global macro investor with 55 years of experience, I have encountered various countries and situations, including China. One of the key lessons I've learned is that many surprises I faced were only surprising because they hadn't happened during my lifetime, though they occurred frequently throughout history. This realization drove me to study historical patterns to better understand the present. Three major forces stood out as universally dominant across all nations, leading me to examine the past 500 years. First, the debt, money, and economic cycle, especially the growth of debt levels. This dynamic is critical in both China and the United States, affecting markets and economies, and determining the rise and fall of reserve currencies. The second force is the internal order and disorder cycle, which involves intense political extremism, populism, and deep societal divides. These conditions were unfamiliar to me until recently. The third key force is the rise and decline of great powers, often resulting in conflicts. These three forces occur in cyclical patterns. For example, the current world order was established in 1945 after World War II. In my research, I also discovered that natural disasters like droughts, floods, and pandemics have caused more fatalities and societal upheaval than wars. Additionally, human ingenuity and technological advancement represent a fifth major force. The interaction of these five elements, debt and monetary cycles, societal order and disorder, power conflicts, natural disasters, and technological progress, creates dynamic patterns and cycles. Currently, the United States faces intense internal conflict marked by left-wing and right-wing populism, reflecting deep wealth and value divides. This period is characterized by a win-at-all-costs mentality, where compromise is seen as weakness. This raises uncertainty about whether a peaceful transfer of power will occur. The possibility of a non-orderly transition is significant, considering history shows similar situations repeating frequently. Even if a peaceful transfer happens, societal fragmentation and debates over the fairness of the system will continue. Issues like the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, regional value differences, and personal matters such as how children are raised, including questions of gender identity, underscore these divides. These conflicts reflect broader societal struggles over core values and beliefs. These issues are fundamentally non-negotiable, and this environment is characterized by growing polarization and deteriorating infrastructure, leading people to relocate to different states. The fact that we can have such a discussion and not consider it absurd reflects the current state of society. Historically, periods of intense conflict are often marked by the rise of a powerful autocratic leader, followed by battles and eventual reforms. In China, for instance, there was unity during the war against Japan, followed by a civil war, the emergence of a victor, and subsequent management of the opposition. Donald Trump exemplifies the populist sentiment in the United States. If he hadn't risen to prominence, someone similar likely would have. His economic policies are typical of what was seen in the 1930s, such as in Germany, focusing on protectionism, nationalism, and isolationism, with high tariffs being a core element. Tariffs serve as an effective method of raising tax revenue. Hypothetically, if tariffs on Chinese imports increased to 60% and a 20% tariff was imposed broadly elsewhere, this could generate around $800 billion annually. This protectionist approach aims to stimulate domestic investment and development. From a business perspective, companies shielded by protectionist policies benefit by reducing external competition. However, this leads to global inefficiencies and increases the cost of goods. Nevertheless, tariff revenue is viewed as a source of taxation to address the significant national deficit. With the deficit being enormous, the question remains whether the funds will come from taxes or other means, fueling a class-based conflict. While this form of taxation is inflationary, taxes themselves can be seen as a type of inflation for those paying them. The left-right divide between capitalism and socialism exacerbates these tensions. For nations dependent on exporting to the United States, these policies present significant challenges. This pattern has played out repeatedly in history. The creation of credit increases purchasing power but also accumulates debt. One person's debt is another's asset. When debt levels become excessive, there are two primary outcomes: default or monetization of the debt. In the latter case, central banks print money to ease repayment, which has long-term consequences. Historical examples, including the Great Depression, illustrate this process. During that period, it took from 1929 to March 1933 for the US to sever the gold standard and print money, thereby alleviating debt burdens. This dynamic affects the holding of bonds. A bond is essentially a promise to receive a set amount of money in the future, an IOU. This process can lead to significant inflation. Ultimately, a large portion of the debt will likely be monetized. There are good and bad ways to handle this process. To reduce debt relative to income, which is necessary, you need to manage deleveraging effectively. If most of the debt is denominated in your own currency and held by domestic debtors and creditors, it becomes easier to manage this process. This scenario applies to both China and the United States. One way to reduce debt is through some form of restructuring. When the debt load is too high to repay entirely, some debts need to be marked down and removed from balance sheets. Since one person's debt is another's asset, this process will inevitably harm someone and is deflationary. However, it is essential to clean up the balance sheets so progress can continue. Another way to manage debt is to print more money, making repayment easier but causing inflation. The ideal approach, often referred to as a beautiful deleveraging, strikes a balance between deflationary debt reduction through restructuring and inflationary measures through monetary expansion. Successfully reducing the debt burden requires this balance. The 2008 financial crisis in the United States was an example of this approach, where fiscal and monetary stimulus helped manage the deleveraging process. Over my time in the United States, I have witnessed 4 major debt crises similar to those in China. In the 1990s, Zhu Rongji effectively managed a successful debt restructuring in China, proving it is possible to achieve a balanced outcome. The approach and timeline vary, but the principle remains consistent. In Japan's case, failure to restructure debt left impaired entities burdened by unaddressed obligations. Additionally, interest rates remained higher than the nominal economic growth rate and inflation rate, leading to high real interest rates and prolonged debt burdens. This mismanagement caused a debt overhang that took 25 years to resolve. While there are poor outcomes like Japan's, deleveraging can be effectively managed, akin to a necessary surgery. The key challenge for both China and the United States lies in determining how they will handle their respective debt issues. This remains one of the most important questions regarding their economic future. To achieve effective debt restructuring, the process must be executed carefully, which is a challenging task. Appropriate monetary policies are also essential. While creating money and credit and distributing it seems simple, doing so irresponsibly can exacerbate problems. There's a saying about irrigating without causing a flood. Excessive stimulus, though widely advocated, can sometimes reinforce the very issues it aims to solve. Policymakers must balance the need for stimulus with the risk of moral hazard. My discussions with policymakers over the years have highlighted this challenge. Simply injecting money and credit without a strategic plan does not solve the underlying issues and must be part of a well-thought-out restructuring process. This balancing act is crucial and represents a significant test of economic management. Throughout history, technology has been a major source of power, both economically and militarily, and its influence is more pronounced now than ever. We live in a world defined by nationalism, conflict, and isolationism. Yet, despite these forces, globalization remains a powerful economic driver. Deal-making and economic activity continue to thrive globally, even as governments attempt to contain these forces. This creates a contradiction between national containment policies and the ongoing globalization of capital and talent. There are parallels in history, particularly with war. In conflicts, there are winners, losers, and neutral parties. Ironically, the winners often weaken themselves through debt accumulation, as seen with Britain, while the losers face devastation. The true beneficiaries are the neutral countries, where capital, talent, and resources flourish due to their stability and fundamentals. When evaluating investment opportunities, I focus on 5 key factors. First, financial stability. Does the country earn more than it spends, with a strong income statement and balance sheet? Second, internal order. Do citizens work together productively, or are societal conflicts rampant? Third, external risk. Is the country likely to engage in or be affected by war? Fourth, climate vulnerability. How susceptible is the nation to costly climate-related issues? Fifth, technological advancement. Is the country innovative and keeping pace with technological progress? These 5 factors help predict which countries will succeed and which will falter. Today, global living standards and wealth are higher than ever, yet the real challenge lies in how societies interact internally and externally. While a multipolar world seems desirable, history suggests that such transitions often lead to conflict over dominance. After such wars, periods of peace follow because societies recognize the horrors of war and prefer stability under a dominant power. Institutions like the United Nations and the WTO have historically struggled to be effective without the leadership of a dominant power. Consequently, optimism about a smooth transition to a multipolar world may be misplaced, given historical patterns.